Hello and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of the anthology of science fiction stories Galactic Cluster by James Blish. We will continue with Beep. Our hero, Mr. Weinbaum, is trying to figure out why this news gathering agency seems to know more about things than his own secret intelligence agency. Weinbaum let himself into Stephen's cell, locking the door behind him and passing the keys out to the guard. He sat down heavily on the nearest stool. Stephen smiled the weak, benevolent smile of the very old and laid his book aside on the bunk. The book, Weinbaum knew, since his office had cleared it, was only a volume of pleasant, harmless lyrics by a new dynasty poet named Nims. "Were our predictions correct, Captain?" Stevens asked. His voice was high and musical, rather like that of a boy soprano. Weinbaum nodded. "You still won't tell us how you did it?" "But I already have," Stevens protested. "Our intelligence network is the best in the universe, Captain. It is superior even to your own excellent organization, as events have shown." "Its results are superior, that I'll grant," Weinbaum said glumly. "If Dana Lee had thrown your letter down her disposal chute, we would have lost the Brindisi and our Dirac transmitter both. Incidentally, did your original letter predict accurately the number of ships we would send?" Stevens nodded pleasantly, his neatly trimmed white beard thrusting forward slightly as he smiled. "I was afraid so." Weinbaum leaned forward. "Do you have the Dirac transmitter, Stevens?" "Of course, Captain. How else could my correspondents report to me with the efficiency you have observed?" "Then why don't our receivers pick up the broadcasts of your agents? Dr. Wald says it's inherent in the principle of the Dirac casts that are picked up by all instruments tuned to receive them, bar none. And at this stage of the game, there are so few such broadcasts being made that we'd be almost certain to detect any that weren't coming from our own operatives." "I decline to answer that question, if you'll excuse the impoliteness," Stevens said, his voice quavering slightly. "I am an old man, Captain, and this intelligence agency is my sole source of income. If I told you how we operate, we would no longer have any advantage over your own service except for the limited freedom from secrecy which we have. I have been assured by competent lawyers that I have every right to operate a private investigation bureau, properly licensed, upon any scale that I may choose, and that I have the right to keep my methods secret as the so-called intellectual assets of the firm. If you wish to use our services, well and good, we will provide them with absolute guarantees on all information we furnish you for an appropriate fee. But our methods are our own property." Robin Weinbaum smiled twistedly. "I'm not a naive man, Mr. Stevens," he said. "My service is hard on naivete. You know as well as I do that the government can't allow you to operate on a freelance basis, supplying top secret information to anyone who can pay the price, or even free of charge to video columnists on a test basis, even though you arrive at every jot of that information independently of espionage, which I still haven't entirely ruled out, by the way. If you can duplicate this Brindisi performance at will, we will have to have your services exclusively. In short, you become a hired civilian arm of our bureau." "Quite," Stevens said, returning the smile in a fatherly way. "We anticipated that, of course. However, we have contracts with other governments to consider. Erskine in particular. If we are to work exclusively for Earth, necessarily our price will include compensation for renouncing our other accounts." "Why should it? Patriotic public servants work for their government at a loss if they can't work for it any other way." "I am quite aware of that. I am quite prepared to renounce my other interests, but I do require to be paid." "How much?" Weinbaum said, suddenly aware that his fists were clenched so tight that they hurt. Stevens appeared to consider, nodding his flowery white head in senile deliberation. My associates would have to be consulted. Tentatively, however, a sum equal to the present appropriation of your bureau would do, pending further negotiations. Weinbaum shot to his feet, eyes wide. You old buccaneer, you know damned well that I can't spend my entire appropriation on a single civilian service. Did it ever occur to you that most of the civilian outfits working for us are at cost plus contracts and that our civilian executives are being paid just a credit a year by their own choice? You are demanding nearly 2,000 credits an hour from your own government and claiming the legal protection the government affords you at the same time in order to let those fanatics on Erskine run up a higher bid. The price is not unreasonable, Stevens said. The service is worth the price. That's where you're wrong. We have the discoverer of the machine working for us. For less than half the sum you're asking, we can find the application of the device you're trading on. Of that, you can be damned sure. A dangerous gamble, Captain. Perhaps. We'll soon see. Weinbaum glared at the placid face. I'm forced to tell you that you're a free man, Mr. Stevens. We've been unable to show that you came by your information by any illegal method. You have classified facts in your possession, but no classified documents, and it's your privilege as a citizen to make guesses, no matter how educated. But we'll catch up with you sooner or later. Had you been reasonable, you might have found yourself in a very good position with us, your income as assured as any political income can be, and your person respected to the hilt. Now, however, you're subject to censorship. You have no idea how humiliating that can be, but I'm going to see to it that you find out. There'll be no more news beats for Dana Lee nor anyone else. I want to see every word of copy that you file with any client outside the Bureau. Every word that is of any use to me will be used, and you'll be paid the statutory 1 cent a word for it, the same rate the FBI pays for anonymous gossip. Everything I don't find useful will be killed without clearance. Eventually, we'll have the modification of Dirac that you're using, and when that happens, you'll be so flat broke a pancake with a hair lip could spit right over you. Weinbaum paused for a moment, astonished at his own fury. Stephen's clarinet-like voice began to sound in the windowless cavity. Captain, I have no doubt that you can do this to me, at least incompletely, but it will prove fruitless. I will give you a prediction at no charge. It is guaranteed, as are all our predictions. It is this: you will never find that modification. Eventually, I will give it to you on my own terms, but you will never find it for yourself, nor will you force it out of me. In the meantime, not a word of copy will be filed with you, for despite the fact that you are an arm of the government, I can well afford to wait you out. Bluster, Weinbaum said. Fact, yours is the bluster, loud talk based on nothing more than a hope. I, however, know whereof I speak. But let us conclude this discussion. It serves no purpose. You will need to see my points made the hard way. Thank you for giving me my freedom. We will talk again under different circumstances on, let me see, yes, on June 9th of the year 2091. That year is, I believe, almost upon us. Stevens picked up his book again, nodding at Weinbaum, his expression harmless and kindly, his hands showing the marked tremor of paralysis agitans. Weinbaum moved helplessly to the door and flagged the turnkey. As the bars closed behind him, Stevens' voice called out, "Oh, yes, and a Happy New Year, Captain." Weinbaum blasted his way back into his own office, at least twice as mad as the proverbial nest of hornets, and at the same time rather dismally aware of his own probable future. If Stevens' second prediction turned out to be as phenomenally accurate as his first had been, Captain Robin Weinbaum would soon be peddling a natty set of second-hand uniforms. He glared down at Margaret Soames, his receptionist. She glared right back. She had known him too long to be intimidated. "Anything?" he said. "Dr. Wald's waiting for you in your office. There are some field reports and a couple of Diracs on your private tape. Any luck with the old codger?" "That," he said crushingly, "is top secret." Poof. That means that nobody still knows the answer but J. Shelby Stevens. He collapsed suddenly. "You're so right. That's just what it does mean. But we'll bust him wide open sooner or later. We've got to. You'll do it, Margaret said. Anything else for me? No. Tip off the clerical staff that there's a half holiday today, then go take in a stereo or a steak or something yourself. Dr. Wald and I have a few private wires to pull, and unless I'm sadly mistaken, a private bottle of aquavit to empty. Right, the receptionist said. Tie one on for me, Chief. I understand that beer is the best chaser for aquavit. I'll have some sent up. If you should return after I am suitably squiffed, Weinbaum said, feeling a little better already, I will kiss you for your thoughtfulness. That should keep you at your stereo at least twice through the third feature. As he went on through the door of his own office, she said demurely behind him, It certainly should. As soon as the door closed, however, his mood became abruptly almost as black as before. Despite his comparative youth, he was now only 55, he had been in the service a long time, and he needed no one to tell him the possible consequences which might flow from possession by a private citizen of the Dirac communicator. If there was ever to be a federation of man in the galaxy, it was within the power of J. Shelby Stevens to ruin it before it had fairly gotten started, and there seemed to be nothing at all that could be done about it. Hello, Thor, he said glumly. Pass the bottle. Hello, Robin. I gather things went badly. Tell me about it. Briefly, Weinbaum told him. The worst of it, he finished, is that Stevens himself predicts that we won't find the application of the Dirac that he's using, and that eventually we'll have to buy it at his price. Somehow I believe him, but I can't see how it's possible. If I were to tell Congress that I was going to spend my entire appropriation for a single civilian service, I'd be out on my ear within the next 3 sessions. Perhaps that isn't his real price, the scientist suggested. If he wants to barter, he'd naturally begin with a demand miles above what he actually wants. Sure, but frankly, Thor, I'd hate to give the old reprobate even a single credit if I could get out of it. Weinbaum sighed. Well, let's see what's come in from the field. Thor Wald moved silently away from Weinbaum's desk while the officer unfolded it and set up the Dirac screen. Stacked neatly next to the ultraphone, a device Weinbaum had been thinking of only days ago as permanently outmoded, were the tapes Margaret had mentioned. He fed the first one into the Dirac and turned the main toggle to the position labeled Start. Instantly, the whole screen went pure white, and the audio speakers emitted an almost instantly end-stopped blare of sound, a beep, which, as Weinbaum already knew, made up a continuous spectrum from about 30 cycles per second to well above 18,000 cycles per second. Then both the light and the noise were gone as if they had never been and were replaced by the familiar face and voice of Weinbaum's local ops chief in Rico City. There's nothing unusual in the way of transmitters in Stevens' office here, the operative said without preamble, and there isn't any local interstellar information staff except for one stenographer, and she's as dumb as they come. About all we could get from her is that Stevens is such a sweet old man. No possibility that she's faking it. She's genuinely stupid, the kind that thinks Beetlejuice is something Indians use to darken their skins. We looked for some kind of list or code table that would give us a line on Stevens' field staff, but that was another dead end. Now we're maintaining a 24-hour Dinwiddie watch on the place from a joint across the street. Orders? Weinbaum dictated to the blank stretch of tape which followed. Margaret, next time you send any Dirac tapes here, cut off that damnable beep from them first. Tell the boys in Rico City that Stevens has been released and that I'm proceeding for an order in security to tap his ultraphone and his local lines. That in one case where I'm sure we can persuade the court that tapping is necessary. Also, and be damn sure you code this, tell them to proceed with the tap immediately and to maintain it regardless of whether or not the court okays it. I'll thumbprint all full responsibility confessions for them. We can't possibly afford to play this patty cake with Stevens. The potential is just too damn big. And oh yes, Margaret, send the message by carrier and send out general orders to everybody concerned not to use the Dirac again, except when distance and time rule out every other medium. Stevens has already admitted that he can receive Dirac casts. He put down the mic and stared morosely for a moment at the beautiful Eridanian scroll wood of his desktop. Wald coughed inquiringly and retrieved the aquavit. Excuse me, Robin, he said, but I should think that that would work both ways. So should I. And yet the fact is that we've never picked up so much as a whisper from either Stevens or his agents. I can't think of any way that could be pulled, but evidently it can. Well, let's rethink the problem and then see what we get, said Wald. I didn't want to say so in front of the young lady for obvious reasons. I mean Miss Lay, of course, not Margaret, but the truth is that the Dirac is essentially a simple mechanism in principle. I seriously doubt that there's any way to transmit a message from it which can't be detected, and an examination of the theory with that proviso in mind might give us something new. What proviso? Weinbaum said. Thorvald left him behind rather often these days. Why, that a direct transmission doesn't necessarily go to all communicators capable of receiving it. If that's true, then the reasons why it is true should emerge from the theory. I see. Okay, proceed on that line. I've been looking at Stephen's dossier while you were talking, and it's an absolute desert. Prior to opening the office in Rico City, there's no dope whatever on J. Shelby Stevens. The man as good as rubbed my nose in the fact that he's using a pseudonym when I first talked to him. I asked him what the J in his name stood for, and he said, "Oh, let's make it Jerome." But who the man behind the pseudonym is it possible that he's using his own initials? No, Weinbaum said. Only the dumbest ever do that, or transpose syllables, or retain any connection at all with their real names. Those are the people who are in serious emotional trouble, people who drive themselves into anonymity but leave clues strewn all around the landscape. Those clues are really a cry for help, for discovery. Of course, we're working on that angle. We can't neglect anything, but J. Shelby Stevens isn't that kind of case, I'm sure. Weinbaum stood up abruptly. Okay, Thor, what's first on your technical program? Well, I suppose we'll have to start with checking the frequencies we use. We're going on Dirac's assumption, and it works very well and always has, that a positron in motion through a crystal lattice is accompanied by de Broglie waves, which are transforms of the waves of an electron in motion somewhere else in the universe. Thus, if we control the frequency and path of the positron, we control the placement of the electron. We cause it to appear, so to speak, in the circuits of a communicator somewhere else. After that, perception is just a matter of amplifying the bursts and reading the signal. Wald scowled and shook his blond head. If Stevens is getting out messages which we don't pick up, my first assumption would be that he's worked out a fine tuning circuit that's more delicate than ours and is more or less sneaking his messages under ours. The only way that could be done, as far as I can see at the moment, is by something really fantastic in the way of exact frequency control of his positron gun. If so, the logical step is for us to go back to the beginning of our tests and rerun our diffractions to see if we can refine our measurements of positron frequencies. The scientist looked so inexpressibly gloomy as he offered this conclusion that a pall of hopelessness settled over Weinbaum in sheer sympathy. You don't look as if you expect that to uncover anything new. I don't. You see, Robin, things are different in physics now than they used to be in the 20th century. In those days, it was always presupposed that physics was limitless. The classic statement was made by Weil, who said that it is the nature of a real thing to be inexhaustible in content. We know now that's not so, except in a remote associational sort of way. Nowadays, physics is a defined and self limited science. Its scope is still prodigious, but we can no longer think of it as endless. This is better established in particle physics than in any other branch of the science. Half of the trouble physicists of the last century had with Euclidean geometry, and hence the reason why they evolved so many recomplicated theories of relativity, is that it's a geometry of lines and thus can be subdivided infinitely. When Cantor proved that there really is an infinity, at least mathematically speaking, that seemed to clinch the case for the possibility of a really infinite physical universe, too. Wald's eyes grew vague, and he paused to gulp down a slug of the licorice flavored aquavit which would have made Weinbaum's every hair stand on end. I remember, Wald said, the man who taught me theory of sets at Princeton many years ago. He used to say, Cantor teaches us there are many kinds of infinities. There was a crazy old man. Weinbaum rescued the bottle hastily. So go on, Thor. Oh, Wald blinked. Yes, well, what we know now is that the geometry which applies to ultimate particles, like a positron, isn't Euclidean at all. It's Pythagorean, a geometry of points, not lines. Once you've measured one of those points, it doesn't matter what kind of quantity you're measuring. You're down as far as you can go. At that point, the universe becomes discontinuous and no further refinement is possible. And I'd say that our positron frequency measurements have already gotten down that far. There isn't another element in the universe denser than plutonium, yet we get the same frequency values by diffraction through plutonium crystals as we get through osmium crystals. That's not the slightest difference. If J. Shelby Stevens is operating in terms of fractions of those values, then he's doing what an organist would call playing in the cracks, which is certainly something you can think about doing, but something that's in actuality impossible to do. Hup? Weinbaum said. Sorry, a hiccup only. Oh, well, maybe Stevens has rebuilt the organ? If he has rebuilt the metrical frame of the universe to accommodate a private skip tracing firm, Wald said firmly, I, for one, see no reason why we can't countercheck him by declaring the whole cosmos null and void. All right, Weinbaum said, grinning. I didn't mean to push your analogy right over the edge. I was just asking. But let's get to work on it anyhow. We can't just sit here and let Stevens get away with it. If this frequency angle turns out to be as hopeless as it seems, we'll try something else. Wald eyed the aquavit bottle owlishly. It's a very pretty problem, he said. Have I ever sung you the song we have in Sweden called Not Og Dag? Weinbaum said to his own surprise in a high falsetto. Excuse me, no, let's hear it. The computer occupied an entire floor of the security building, its seemingly identical banks laid out side by side on the floor along an advanced pathological state of piano's space-filling curve. At the current business end of the line was a master control board with a large television screen at its center, at which Dr. Wald was stationed, with Weinbaum looking, silently but anxiously, over his shoulder. The screen itself showed a pattern which, except that it was drawn in green light against a dark gray background, strongly resembled the grain in the piece of highly polished mahogany. Photographs of similar patterns were stacked on a small table to Dr. Wald's right. Several had spilled over onto the floor. Well, there it is, Wald sighed at length, and I won't struggle to keep myself from saying I told you so. What you've had me do here, Robin, is to reconfirm about half the basic postulates of particle physics, which is why it took so long, even though it was the first project we started. He snapped off the screen. There are no cracks for J. Shelby to play in. That's definite. If you had said that's flat, you would have made a joke, Weinbaum said sourly. Look, isn't there still a chance of error, if not on your part, then on the computer's? After all, it's set to work only with the unit charges of modern physics. Mightn't we have to disconnect banks that contain that bias before the machine will follow the fractional charge instructions we gave it? Disconnect, he says, Wald groaned, mopping his brow reflectively. The bias exists everywhere in the machine, my friend, because it functions everywhere on those same unit charges. It wasn't a matter of subtracting banks. We had to add one with a bias all its own to counteract the corrections the computer would otherwise apply to the instructions. The technicians thought I was crazy. Now, 5 months later, I've proved I am. Weinbaum grinned in spite of himself. What about the other projects? All done, some time back, as a matter of fact. The staff and I checked every single Dirac tape we've received since you released J. Shelby from Yaffank, and any sign of intermodulation, marginal signals, or anything else of the kind. There's nothing, Robin, absolutely nothing. That's our net results all round. Which leaves us just where we started, Weinbaum said. All the monitoring projects came to the same dead end. I strongly suspect that Stevens hasn't risked any further calls from his home office to his field staff, even though he seemed confident that we'd never intercept such calls, as we haven't. Even our local wiretapping hasn't turned up anything but calls by Stevens' secretary making appointments for him with various clients, actual and potential. Any information he's selling these days, he's passed on in person, and not in his office either, because we've got bugs planted all over it and haven't heard a thing. That must limit his range of operation enormously, Wald objected. Weinbaum nodded. Without a doubt, but he shows no signs of being bothered by it. He can't have sent any tips to Erskine recently, for instance, because our last tangle with that crew came out very well for us, even though we had to use the Dirac to send the orders to our squadron out there. If he overheard us, he didn't even try to pass the word. Just as he said, he's sweating us out. Weinbaum paused. Wait a minute, here comes Margaret. And by the length of her stride, I'd say she's got something particularly nasty on her mind. You bet I do, Margaret Soames said vindictively, and it'll blow plenty of lids around here, or I miss my guess. The ID squad has finally pinned down J. Shelby Stevens. They did it with the voice comparator alone. How does that work? Wald asked interestedly. Blink microphone, Weinbaum said impatiently, isolates inflections on single normal stressed syllables and matches them. Standard ID searching technique on cases of this kind that it takes so long we usually get the quarry by other means before it pays off. Well, don't stand there like a dummy, Margaret. Who is he? He, Margaret said, is your sweetheart of the video waves, Miss Dana Lee. They're crazy, Wald said, staring at her. Weinbaum came slowly out of his first shock of stunned disbelief. No, Thor, he said finally. No, it figures. If a woman is going to go in for disguises, there are always two she can assume outside her own sex, a young boy and a very old man. And Dana's an actress. That's no news to us. But but why did she do it, Robin? That's what we're going to find out right now. So we wouldn't get the Dirac modification by ourselves, eh? Well, there are other ways of getting answers besides particle physics. Margaret, do you have a pickup order out for that girl? No, the receptionist said. This is one chestnut I wanted to see you pull out for yourself. You give me the authority and I send the order, not before. Spiteful child. Send it then and glory to my gritted teeth. Come on, Thor, let's put the nutcracker on this chestnut. As they were leaving the computer floor, Weinbaum stopped suddenly in his tracks and began to mutter in an almost inaudible voice. Wald said, What's the matter, Robin? Nothing. I keep being brought up short by those predictions. What's the date? June 9th. Why? It's the exact date that Stevens predicted we'd meet again. Damn it, something tells me that this isn't going to be as simple as it looks. And we'll find out how complicated it gets next time.